So this is the first instalment of Discursion.
Maybe you should start, Dominic, by explaining why we've chosen the name Discursion.
Well, now I've lost the definition, but it involves something like the quality of ranging from topic to topic, which I think is what we're expecting to do while talking about discs.
Yeah.
Specifically DVDs or Blu-ray discs.
Yes. And today we're talking about 310 to Yuma, which has been distributed by Criterion on Blu-ray.
Yes, in the UK. I think it was released... Well, we're doing this on, the 2nd of March? I think it was released quite recently.
Yes.
In the last month or two.
Yes, and that's the sort of idea, that it's a recently released film, and it might also be a re-release. It might be a new film or an old film.
Absolutely. But actually, having said that we'll talk about the discs, we're actually intending to talk about the films.
Yes.
I think we're not going to concentrate on the quality of the remastery or those things. I think it's more an opportunity to talk about the films in some detail. But
exactly.
We probably should say who we are. So I'm Dominic, Dominic Lash.
And I'm Stephen Roberts.
We're both currently doing PhDs in film at University of Bristol.
Maybe we should just start by just kind of describing the film.
Delmer Dave's 310 to Yuma from 1957.
Yes.
When I first encountered the narrative with the remake from 2007, I think, with Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
But perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps the less said about that, the better. Or anyway, perhaps that's not the focus of this afternoon's conversation.
It's a discussion, that's for sure.
That would be a discussion too far. So it focuses on the core of the narrative. Is a sort of cattle rancher, Dan Evans, played by Van Heflin, and his task of guarding this outlaw Ben Wade, played by Glenn Ford, and ensuring that he gets on the eponymous train, the 310 to Yuma, so he can head off to prison.
Yes, that's right. Ben Wade sort of Dan Evans stumbles across a hold-up in the desert, and we then we have the sort of, the introduction of Ben Wade's gang, the kind of negotiation of the gang, the capture of Ben Wade, his transportation to contention, and then waiting for the train to arrive.
So there's some kind of sense in which the film is kind of structured around a sort of set piece.
Yes.
In a sense. I mean, I think if you weren't clear that the title refers to a train, the song which begins the film and then runs throughout it makes that entirely clear.
Yeah.
So in a certain sense, you're prepared early on for.
Yes.
What's going to ensue?
Yes, and the score runs throughout the film. Sometimes it's overt, and sometimes it's in the background being whistled by Ben Wade.
There is an interesting sort of play with exactly what the status of the song is in the film's world, because it's sung by Frankie Lane, right? Who I guess was a big thing at the time.
Yes.
So you've got to start. It's a newly composed song for the film.
Yeah. 310 to Yuma by Ned Washington and George Dunning, sung by Frankie Lane, a Columbia recording artist.
There we are. So it's a it's a kind of corporate sort of tie-in. You've got a soundtrack album to sell as well as the film.
Yes.
But while it's sung at the beginning and at the end, and then as you say, kind of is interwoven into the soundtrack throughout, often sort of played on a guitar. There's lots of solo guitars. There could be someone on a porch out somewhere playing it, but it's not. It seems fairly clearly non-diegetic, and other times interwoven with the orchestral thing. But then there's also moments where Glenn Ford whistles the melody. And then there's a bit where a woman sings the song.
Yes.
But then Glenn Ford starts talking about how nice it is to hear a woman singing.
Yes.
And so it kind of hints at this idea that maybe someone actually is singing it off in another runs somewhere, but it's not made explicit.
Yeah, that movement between the diegetic and the non-diegetic relates to a broader theme in the film, and I think that's the feeling that this journey is somehow fated and is an element of folklore in some way. And then there is the naturalism and the kind of simplicity of the dialogue of sort of whistling a tune, of incidental detail, you know, a woman whistling, or sort of a scruffy dog atop a coffin in the street, or you know, these small sort of frontier details. So there's this. I think there's this movement between sort of the everyday, or the sort of street level kind of realism, and then the broader sort of feeling that this journey is quite special and is fated in some way.
Yeah, and it is, because there is a sort of spectacular quality. I mean, the photography has some, you know, really quite spectacular. It's not sort of Death Valley. I'm not sure exactly where it's shot, but it has some of that quality. You know, these, you know, kind of. You know, John Ford westerns, and then obviously it was taken up after these by, you know, Sergio Leone and that kind of and those kind of films. It's there, but it doesn't. Yeah, it does seem to me to play a subtly different. Have a different function, or a slightly different function.
The landscape.
Yeah.
You have this Monument Valley-esque landscape at times. But then at other times we have, you know, the small town of, I've written it down, Bisbee, with its very, you know, quiet bar, small sort of space, stripped back. You know, there's something about scale there actually. You can see in the cinematography the sort of grain of the wood. Smoke.
Yes, definitely.
There's a lot of texture there.
But there is something about the scale. But you would the obvious thing to say would be that it sets off these sort of small lives which are important to the people living them, but are nonetheless, in the wider scheme of things, not terribly significant, or not seen as significant. That it sets them off against these enormous vistas and mountains, but it doesn't quite feel to me like that's quite right. I think I'm hard pressed to say exactly why not, because there is a sense in which they're definitely very much at home. It's not quite the frontier because they're settled. I mean, they're a dangerous bandits like Glenn Ford, but there aren't Indians, you know, Native Americans threatening them, and it's a tough life, but
there's not really a pioneering spirit.
No.
There's more a sense of touring these well-used towns, and that they're often quite.
And it's almost
quiet.
like a sort of retreat. I was thinking at one point there are interesting. I think this comes up perhaps most clearly there's a scene when after Glenn Ford is captured, they do a kind of switcheroo manoeuvre to make his gang think that he's been taken off in the stagecoach to a certain destination, whereas in fact he spends the night with you know, the Evans farm or ranch, I guess. And there's a lovely scene of him having dinner with Evans and his wife and kids. And there's sort of interesting oppositions of both kind of country and city and civilization and whatever the opposite, you know, of that is, and sophistication and not. Because there's a lot of play made with manners, and they sort of all have very good manners, but then there's a sense in which Evans is more of he's a kind of a rustic, so his good manners are somehow unsophisticated. Yeah. Whereas Glenn Ford has good manners, but is a flatterer, and his good manners are not to be trusted. Anyway, but in that it comes up that Evans' wife is from San Francisco.
Yes.
Yes. But there's not a sense that she is not at home where she is and she misses the city, or if there is, there's just a subtle sense in how she enjoys being flattered by Glenn Ford, but she kind of knows that it doesn't mean anything, I think. And then that connects to the what's her name? Emmy, played by Felicia Farr, yeah, who's the barmaid who Glenn Ford falls for and has a snatched hour of passion with, presumably, because she's come to Bisbee for her health.
Yes.
So it's a healthier place to be, and yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a difficult life, but like you say, it doesn't quite have the sense of pioneering. It's more like the stage after pioneering,
Yes.
kind of bedding in.
Yes. Yeah. There is a sense of danger, nonetheless. I think a lot of it comes from anticipation. It's about waiting for the rain to fall, about waiting for the train to arrive. And you'll notice that's heightened by the emptiness of these sort of spaces. They arrive in Bisbee when everyone is sleeping, and they arrive in contention when it seems there are very few people around apart from those taking part in a funeral. There's a sense of sort of loneliness.
Yes. Well, there are hints that people are hiding because they're frightened of what might be going to ensue, but that's not. But you do somehow get the sense that it's not a sense of quietness in opposition to the normal bustle. You feel that not much would be going on.
Yes, this is not
ordinarily.
This is not the busy bar in which Marilyn Monroe is dancing in River of No Return at all.
No.
If anything, the film sort of clears away its characters to highlight these symmetries, and that you mentioned the relationship between Dan Evans and Ben Wade, and this kind of love triangle, strange and brief-lived love triangle with Dan Evans' wife, Alice Evans. And it seems the sort of townsfolk are there, I think, to be kind of part of the scenery. I don't know if that's fair. There's sort of, again, it's this, for me, this idea of simplicity, and maybe I can try and refine that a little bit, but there's something about the simplicity of the black and white cinematography, the street level sort of realism and incidental detail. It's sort of just the right amount.
Do you think the cinematography and things give the impression of being simpler than they are? I sort of feel it does have it does have this impression of sort of elegance and simplicity, but when you stop, there are actually some quite dramatically framed, compositions. I mean, it's not quite Orson Welles territory, but there are, when they're gathering to decide whether or not they're going to, or sort of what they're going to do with Ben Wade. There's sort of shots looking at all the men sort of from a really low angle, and there are interesting shots of kind of corners of buildings that frame things well. And then there are these kind of big, crane shots that do kind of move up from the town and show that. But somehow it has a quieter tone.
Yes.
I think that would lead you to expect.
Yes. We should probably mention that this film is in the late 1950s, and by that point over half of Hollywood's films were in colour. So it becomes more of an active decision to shoot in black and white. And I can think of a handful of films from this period, like The Tin Star or William Wyler's The Desperate Hours, that do seem to make that decision. And for me, it usually adds some level of suspense. I think you're right. It has more to do with the tone. It does. The composition does interesting things with shapes, and it has a number of camera movements, and there's all sorts of dramatically inflected kind of camera angles as well. But
yeah, they're somehow self-effacing at the same time.
Yes. Yes. How much style is in this film?
Well, and then does it also have a looking? If you're not careful, you could mistake this for a mid-40s film. I mean, Glenn Ford doesn't look that different to how he looks in Gilda, which is what, 44, 46, something like that. Yeah,
around.
So say 10 years earlier. I mean, he does, and but the fact that it's later does mean that, like you say, there's a feeling that certain things are possibly more, not necessarily more consciously chosen, but the fact of choosing them gives a different angle on things. Also, just in terms of the narrative as well. I mean, these characters who, I suppose, as often with westerns, as is true of many films, it's a question of the film plays with what if you were sympathetic you might call an archetype, and if you're unsympathetic we'd call a stereotype.
Yes.
I mean, particularly Dan Evans' character, like, of course, is the best shot in the neighbourhood.
Yeah. He can shoot a coyote a mile away.
Exactly, but sort of reluctantly, so he doesn't, And then he's there with the town drunk, who of course turns out to be more honourable than known as. These are figures we've seen in umpteen films.
Yeah.
And it's not that the film is kind of ironising them or something, but it's is it almost a sort of mythic kind of quality, which I mean that's not a new thing in westerns, but I mean at this point wasn't, but still.
There seems to be some ways in which the film, it encapsulates a lot of the moral ambiguity of the post-war Western in particular that you see in films like Man of the West, for instance. This these problems of sort of being a bystander, do you intervene? What's honourable work? Making sure to pay off your debts. Are you a coward? Do you drink too much? Are you infatuated with someone that's dishonourable?
Although is it? I mean, that's interesting. But is it that? Because again, also this sort of mythic quality, like the film almost again this kind of starkness, which is there in how it looks, but in the sort of simplicity of the narrative, and it has occasionally these kind of clever little manoeuvres, such as when. The brother of a man who was shot by Wade comes in to shoot Wade, and in preventing him from being shot, so ensuring that he can still go under trial, the gun goes off, and then that means that Wade's gang learn that he is being held there, which they hadn't previously known. Well, that's handled again quite sort of deftly, so you don't sort of notice that there's a somewhat intricate narrative sort of process going on. It feels simpler than it is, I feel. And then at the end, everything is absolutely piled on to make it absolutely clear that there's no reason for Evans to carry on except for the fact that, I mean, the reason that he gives is because the town drunk, who at this point has died, is like, well, if the town drunk is prepared to do what's right, I have to. But it's simply the right thing to do. But it almost becomes, so the initial narrative explanation is that he doesn't really want to do this, but his ranch is suffering from drought and he can't afford the money to get the rights to use a neighbour's stream. He tries to get a loan, the loan is turned down, but of course the exact amount of money that he needs to get access to the water, which is $200, is the exact same amount. It just so happens that is offered for this particular job of guarding the prisoner, but that's removed. So the prisoner, Glenn Ford offers to pay him vast sums. Okay, he turns that down. That's relatively straightforward because he's quite clearly a villain, and that we've seen him murder people. But the proprietor of the of the stagecoach, which was robbed in the beginning, says it's fine, I'll pay you the money anyway. His wife comes and implores him. She says, it's been set up that he feels that she feels he's not heroic enough, or he's not sort of proactive enough, and she comes again. So that's not another plausible motivation, which explains why he goes about doing this. But she comes explicitly to release him from that. The whole reason he needs the money is because he hasn't got any water, and there's these great thunder cracks exactly at that point. So rain is about to ensue. So it's sort of all the reasons which he has for doing this, which are other than simply because it's the right thing to do, we're all at once removed.
Yes.
And then almost, I don't think it's intended to be parodic, but it's quite close to the parodic.
Is the film deceptively simple? It sounds like there are all sorts of mechanisms working around in the background. Perhaps we can say something about Delmer Davies as well, and how maybe he's usually considered to be more of a workman than an auteur, and someone that's not, I don't know, he's not a John Ford Western director, you know. He's there's something about the simplicity of the aesthetic, perhaps being more complex than it initially seems, that it's not as simple as it seems. And the narrative, how it seems to work like clockwork, but you're not aware again of all of the sort of small chess piece moves that are being made. There is a lot going on. There is a lot going on there, and the film is quite compact as well. It's not a long film.
No, it's just an hour and a half.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are these symmetries in the film as well that are perhaps not as clean cut as they initially seem.
But yeah, I'm interested, like this thing you said about these moral ambiguities, which is right, but I'm interested to sort of push that a bit further, because it's not, because again, what that would lead one to think, and that's what one finds, I think, in other sort of westerns and, you know, revisionist westerns, is precisely to throw in ambiguities almost in a sort of realist mode, right, to sort of kind of situate things a bit more concretely, so then the distinction between bad guys and good guys starts to break down. But that's not, I don't think there's any ambiguity that that Van Heffen is a good guy and Glenn Ford is a bad guy, is there?
Well,
or at least if there is, it's not quite in, it's not in the status of their goodness or badness. I mean, they're sort of more than that. Definitely Glenn Ford is more than a bad guy.
Yes.
But the ambiguity doesn't render him less of a murderer or a thief, and there certainly aren't. There's nothing which compromises Van Heffen's character. He's not sort of, you know, a fundamentally good man who's flawed. There's sort of hints that he thinks he's maybe seen as a coward, but
there's a hint that he's seriously considering the offer that Ben makes to him, which would be a bad act, right? Given the kind of crimes that Ben has been involved with.
So that's
It's
important.
dirty money.
No, so how much he's seriously considering it, yes, that would be. I'm not sure how much I really think that he is, but that's definitely that's definitely a sort of a live question.
Nice symmetry between Ben Wade flirting with Emmy in the first half of the film, and then Ben Wade flirting with down in the second half of the film.
There's just a little thing, I think, which runs through it with the notion of being tired as a euphemism for sex, or as related to, which is just sort of, it's not a big theme, but it's delicately, because right very early on, just as Dan is about to ride off into town to try and get the loan, he gets up on his horse and he says to his wife, you know, and then maybe, you know, if they can get the water and the cattle are doing better and the ranch doing better, he says something like, you know, then maybe we won't both be so tired, and sort of gives her a kind of something of a nudge, wink kind of look.
Yes, no, definitely.
But then when Glenn Ford goes into the bar, there's a whole rigmarole about the fact that the marshal is sleeping, and that's when he's tired, and then I've forgotten her name again. Emmy says, you know, that because he has his siesta between 1 and 2, and she's like, I have my siesta between 2 and 3.
He's come too early.
Exactly. So that's all there, and then later on, like you say, it then moves to when they're in the when
bridal suite in the hotel. Yes.
Absolutely, they're not only in the hotel room together, they're in the bridal suite, and Glenn Ford makes some comment about Van Heffen looking tired. So anyway, it's
yes. Maybe we could talk about dialogue as well, just in a kind of general way. I've written down the word niceties, and I'm not quite sure that that's what it is, but there seems to be a lot of detail, I suppose, in the conversations, and it's not uncommon for one of the characters to, you know, share a bit of poetic description about a woman's eyes looking like the sea. For Ben and Dan to quite comfortably kind of talk about their futures and kind of go into the kind of hypothetical mode. There's just a lot of conversation.
But when people do those things, there's a definite sense that they are sort of performing within the film world. It's not. It doesn't strike me as, there are possibly other westerns where there's a sense where a kind of heightened manner of talking is how people talk in this world, whereas that's not quite the case here.
No.
It's sort of, when Glenn Ford is, saying this stuff to Alice, like he's buttering her up. I mean, I guess it's probably slightly different, but the stuff between Emmy and Wade. That's. I mean, I wonder if the dialogue again is like this thing we've been saying about all these other aspects of the film.
Yes.
That it has this, again, deceptive simplicity. That
Yes.
it doesn't ask you to spot. You don't come out of the film, I don't think, saying what a fantastic script that was.
No.
But
Conversations that seem quite layered. Perhaps more layered than they actually are. Part of it, for me, comes from the symmetry, again. It's usually a question and answer session.
Yeah. Well, what people say is really...
two characters.
So the bits when this, maybe connecting to something else I was wondering about, it might be worth saying something about the performances, and particularly the two sort of central performances. But so the way that Glenn Ford sort of needles Van Heflin, in fact, it has a lot more to do with what he says than how he says it as such. He says particular things to him about, if I was married to your wife, I would treat her better, etc., etc. But his whole character has this sort of air of being incredibly calm and this.
It's lizard-like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the way that Glenn Ford plays it, I think it is somewhat understated, or he lets it do its. He doesn't seem to me to spend a lot of time giving you clues that he's a bastard. He says the things that he says and does the things that he does. We've seen him very early on in the film shoot two men, of whom, one of which is one of his own gang.
Yes.
He doesn't need to look mean and tough.
Yes.
Because we've seen that he is, and he doesn't need to put a whole load of, acting into the way that he needles
No.
Van Heflin, because the things that he says are needling enough in himself. I don't mean that he's not putting things into it, but
He always seems to be working on something. He's always his conversations seem to be a plan or a way of getting someone to perform a task. For example, when he asks Dan to prop up the window, he seems to be masterminding something.
I think
he seems to be in control of the conversation.
But there's an interesting thing, and then this comes out maybe also in the last bit when they're going across town, that he's generally in control and confident. Glenn Ford is, because he's sure that his men are going to come and spring him. Whereas Van Heflin is tense, but then you get these little moments where Van Heflin gets confidence, and little moments when Glenn Ford loses confidence, and they're quite sort of subtly played, but quite nicely. There's something in the eyes, or little moment when Glenn Ford says it'll be really tough to get around a particular corner, and then they successfly do, and there's kind of an increase in confidence in Van Heflin. And there's just a few moments where you see. So early on, for example, when they first bring Glenn Ford to the hotel. One of his men is already in the hotel, and he is meant at that point to spring him, but he doesn't because he's fast asleep. And you see Glenn Ford, he can't say anything about it, but you see him. There's just a moment of losing control. Yeah, but that's an interesting sort of symmetry, because again, it's a symmetry, but it's a sort of opposite, opposite symmetry. But Van Heflin is so sort of.
It reminds me of his role in Shane. A lot of the time, because there is a more powerful or assertive male that he is trying to accommodate in some way.
I almost feel that the most assertive things are actually the weakest. There's one sort of passage where I can't exactly remember what's been said to him, but Glenn Ford really gets to him, and then he gets angry and throws him back on the bed. And I almost feel that's one of the least convincing aspect of his performance.
Yes.
Just the kind of quiet, going on and doing it, but he is scared, and he is. He also, I'm not quite sure how he does this. I don't know if you agree. He somehow gives the impression of being cleverer than he looks, which I think is what you're meant to think about the character. But I'm not quite sure how an actor gives you that impression.
Well, he's. We can perhaps talk about his character in that he's a man of the land, and it seems to be quite pragmatic, I suppose. At the start of the film, he's concerned about simple matters like keeping his cattle in check and farming and checking in on his kids. But he has some good comebacks, especially in contention. Glenn Ford says something like, "I'm like you, I'm quiet." And Van Heflin says, "Well, you're quiet like me, shut up like me."
No, absolutely. No, he is quite witty. I mean, that's what I mean. But you get the impression that the people sort of around him, everyone thinks he's solid, but he's sort of easy to overlook. But in fact, he's got a lot going on. And somehow, again, without sort of really obviously kind of telegraphing this, somehow you get this from the character, almost in sort of opposition to the marshal in Ian Bisbee, who's sort of almost the other way around. Like he's no fool, but he's fairly average. He's not a bumbling law enforcement. He's perfectly capable, but he's nothing extraordinary.
Not a man of stratagems.
No. So how it's played, sort of when it is revealed that they'd already met Ben Wade and his entire gang, hadn't realised who they were, and then let them go. You can imagine another film really playing that for laughs and the kind of idiocy of and the ineffectuality of official law enforcement.
Yes.
But it's not played like that. I mean, there is that joke, but it's, again, much more understated. And he's not made out to be a fool. He's just made out to be a bit average, I think.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, I wonder, sort of coming kind of right up to the conclusion of the film, where, the sort of final shots of the train is just starting to pull out again, and there's smoke, but and Ben and Dan are confronting Ben's gang, but of course Dan is standing behind Ben, so his gang want him to fall to the ground so they can shoot.
And he defects.
Shoot Dan, and then he doesn't do this, and he says that Dan will have to trust him, that he will jump, and they both jump into the kind of baggage compartment of the train, and his explicit reasoning is because otherwise he'd be in Dan's debt because he saved his life earlier from in the hotel room against the brother of the guy he shot. But that's not entirely convincing as a reason, I don't think. They've become partners in this in this mission, and he says, "I've broken out of Yuma before," and Dan says, "Well, I have nothing more to do with it. This is it. I don't care if you escape." I mean, that's what's implied. But yes. I wonder, do you think it occurred to me, have you got anything to be said about comparing it to the ending of Red River? Of Howard Hawks' Red River, because that has. Well, also I just noticed watching this time that both of them have a climactic scene of walking through a whole load of cattle.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, because this happens. The two of them sort of walk that, and of course there's a famous shot of John Wayne walking through the cattle, but there's something about the relationship between the two men, and then the way it's upset. Which just has some parallels. I mean, obviously the narrative in Red River is very different, but these people who are kind of effectively father and son, or kind of John Wayne is a sort of adoptive father to Montgomery Clift's character, but then because Wayne thinks he's been betrayed, he's spent months just hunting down with the intention of killing him, and then doesn't kill him. And this has something of. Their final act is some sort of act of partnership, whereas the entire structure has been
contention.
Yeah, exactly, in contention. I don't know. I mean, they're extremely different films, but just something of the flavour or the structure of the ending just seemed to me slightly reminiscent of it.
Yes. The ending is a miracle, isn't it? Because it starts to rain.
yes, it starts to rain, and you can't, I think, reasonably expect Glenn Ford to behave the way he does at the end. I think. I mean, there's nothing in the film which it doesn't even really set up their rapprochement or whatever it is. Their understanding only really becomes anything like sort of explicit right at the very end.
Yes.
It would have been easy to. I mean, there are. Having said that, there are some lines about them being similar, aren't there? But you feel that this is just Glenn Ford winding up
Yes.
Van Heflin.
Yes. I mean, Glenn Ford's definitely trying to recruit Van Heflin into his gang, and maybe has some respect for him, having seen, maybe he's the only person I think to have actually successfully gone this far alone. Perhaps as sort of, there's something in that. Again, but I mean, it's becoming a bit of a lazy point, but there's this kind of the fact that it's fated and that two very different characters eventually reconcile. I mean, they're opposites, aren't they? In some ways. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some sort of, I don't know. There's some sort of there's an idea of honourability that links them. Although even then, I'm not sure about this with Glenn Ford. I mean, like when Glenn Ford says to Van Heflin, he's like, no, I didn't murder those guys. They shot first. I mean, that's not because we've seen that happen, and that's not true. Because what happens is the driver of the coach has taken one of Wade's men hostage, and so rather than deal with this situation, Wade shoots the hostage, shoots his own man first, so there is no hostage, and then shoots the hostage taker, and we've seen that in full view.
Yes.
So he is a murderer.
Yes.
and he lies about not being a murderer.
Yes. Van Heflin, on the other hand, has lots of moral scruples and is very conscious of what he's doing.
Yeah. Again, it's something more or different, or if it's more complex. But again, one could imagine a sort of similar film, which was something along the lines of the guy might be a murderer, but he's or an outlaw, but he's an honourable.
Yes.
An honourable outlaw. There are lots of examples of a sort of honourable villain. But I'm not sure that's quite right in this case. It seems more like that he gains respect for Van Heflin somehow, maybe.
Yes. Did the two of them borrow from each other in the sense that Glenn Ford seems quite adaptable to more civil spaces like the family home, and Van Heflin starts to take on some of the more... I'm not quite sure what word to use really, but he's the one carrying a gun by the time they're in the hotel, and he's the one pushing Ford around after we've seen Ford, with his own posse, and
yes,
he seems to be he's in an uncomfortable situation.
Although Van Heflin fails to get a posse, there's an attempt for him to have a posse, so there'll be a more even contest, and the men that they manage to round up then all prove to be cowards and run away. So he fails in his attempt to be like Glenn Ford.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't want to say he is trying to be like Glenn.
No,
Ford.
but sort of structurally, the film.
But he's trying to. He's deciding which side to pick. I'm not totally convinced that he's deeply conflicted about whether or not he should partner up with Glenn Ford. But there is a small moment of maybe indecision in the hotel where he needs Glenn Ford to shut up so he can think about the offer, perhaps, and then Glenn Ford pushes it just a bit too far, and Van Heflin says, "Right, no, that's it."
I mean, it's not. That's the interesting thing in this. Yeah, so in terms of what it's about, because it's there's long sections of the film which are about waiting and this tension, and of course that's psychological to an extent because one has to inhabit the situation, and I feel that we're definitely. I mean, aside from the fact that he's the good guy, we're sort of aligned with Van Heflin and his tension because I think we sort of believe Glenn Ford's calm. I mean, there's obviously an extent to which his calm is, to a degree, a performance. But I think, or at least my reaction is that's only partly the case. He is, I think, genuinely confident that his men will free him. But while there's this psychological tension, I'm not sure that it's sort of turmoil or such. I mean, I think you're right. There is some. I mean, he obviously does have to consider the offer, but I think he only considers it and then realizes that there's no way that he can.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he's seriously tempted.
No, I don't think he's deeply conflicted.
So again, there's almost this sort of starkness of the moral dimensions are not particularly what the film is interested in. It is more the psychological qualities of being in that situation.
Yes.
Again, there's
and the material qualities. As well.
Yeah, and all this. I think we tend to believe that it is extraordinarily hot, right? Glenn Ford asked to have the window open, and clearly that's just a ruse because he wants to try and get the gun or see if Van Heflin would shoot him. But all this sweat that we continually see on Van Heflin's face, it's never clear the degree to which that's due to stress and the degree to which it's due to heat. It's clearly due to both.
Yes. Yeah. Is it? I mean, you don't want to. Again, you don't really want to go too far down that moral route because I agree. I think it. I don't think it's primarily what the film is about. I don't think it's what makes it distinctive. The first time I saw this film, it was, and especially watching this on Blu-ray now, is the material qualities of just being in that space. And the first shot is a close up on a dry, textured desert floor.
There's a thing about scale I find in that very first shot because I'm not sure, or I wasn't sure when first seeing it what sort of scale that is. You don't have any clues of scale. It's sort of purely a texture.
Yes. Certainly. And but then we pan up and we have this panoramic shot of the desert with the trail of the carriage and coming forward to the foreground. If I were more eloquent, I'd be able to relate that somehow to these themes of kind of simplicity and of a kind of material realism and the folklore and the sort of fated aspects of the journey as well.
Right.
So there's just a joy of sort of seeing the men kind of sit at the bar lighting matches, pouring drinks. The fact that Emmy pours too much drink into Glenn Ford's glass so that it spills over onto the table. Seeing there is a wonderful shot in which Glenn Ford is sort of interviewing Emmy, and played by Felicia Farr, and she's leaning on a post, and you can see the grain of the wood and. Again, it's...
there is something just about putting us in that space, in that location. Yeah. I mean, there's something about, it ties with what we were just saying about Van Heflin failing to get a posse. There is something about kind of authority and society, maybe. Van Heflin says at one point that he isn't a deputy, and then the marshal says, well, everyone is right now. But so what Glenn Ford has is authority because he has a bunch of men who will follow him, and they'll drink to him even though in the bar, even though he's just shot one of their number. But we don't get the impression that they're simply sort of terrorised. I mean, clearly they're frightened of him, but there is a sense in which they are following. I mean,
they're following cult law or sort of an agreed upon unwritten law.
Yeah, but there is a sort of irrationality. So when I think he's called Charlie, isn't he? His kind of head.
Yeah.
When he says, he toasts Glenn Ford and says, if you hadn't shot him, more of us might have died. That's not just a rationalisation. There's a sense in which that's true. They sort of respect his. They respect his actions, whatever. So he's someone with authority over men, whereas we see Van Heflin and women. Yeah. We see Van Heflin at dinner very conspicuously not having authority over his own two sons.
Yes. Or as you've said, his own group that he briefly forms to carry Glenn forward to the train.
Yeah. So there is. I mean, is that something? I know we've been saying it's not really a kind of frontiers, but is a sort of. He's not. I mean, people like Van Heflin and they respect him, but he doesn't seem to have great friend. I mean, even the drunk, it isn't. It's not the drunk is his best buddy, or it's not. It's not like.
No, it's not a sheriff and deputy situation or anything like that.
It's not Rio Bravo.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. It's not that either. So he doesn't like his world is his wife and his 2 children,
and his strength is largely internal, right? The idea that he has fibre, moral fibre, and
so he's capable. He can do but he's not antisocial, as in he doesn't struggle. I mean, he has his struggles, but he doesn't he's not seriously incapable as either a husband or a father, really. He has his doubts about it, but in fact he's perfectly normal,
Yeah.
But he is but without being an outlaw, he's the loner, whereas the outlaw isn't a loner,
Yes. Does that have something to do, again, perhaps with the emptiness of the town? I mean, how can the outlaw be the loner or the kind of outcast when he's the only, there are very few people in the town and he just seems to move in and occupy it.
Yeah.
And someone pours him a drink and thank you very much. And I don't think there's much social commentary because there isn't much of a society there, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So
the authority is more it comes from these small groups and these small the dialogues that you have between 2 individuals, or
there's almost perhaps a kind of minimalism.
Yeah.
It's sort of how much do you need to make a Western. I mean, is this sort of a step on the road towards the kind of things that Leone was doing? I mean, there are certain specific sort of
the close-ups, for example.
Absolutely, and then I was also thinking there are certain things to do with particularly sort of men falling off, men who were shot and then falling off roofs.
Right.
You get those in the Eastwood Leone films. I feel there are. I couldn't cite specific examples, but so there do seem to be some sort of iconographical things that are reminiscent of, although of course they're in advance of.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Is there a sense in which perhaps there are certain things which this does with the? Because I mean, the Western is a aged genre, by 1957.
Yes. Yeah.
But yet we haven't quite got to that stage where Leone can treat it very much as sort of something that he's working with.
Yes.
More than inhabiting. It still is inhabited, but it's perhaps.
I really like this word minimalism, and I before I offered the words realism and simplicity, and they didn't quite seem to work. I don't think I was searching for something else, but minimalism works quite well. That there's almost the risk of maybe stripping it back so far that it seems like a Leone sort of, let's say, self-conscious or.
Yes, mannerism. I mean, when does minimalism become mannerism?
Yes.
It doesn't quite feel that it's got to that point in this film for me, but I can feel how I can appreciate how it could seem that way.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. It also has some similarities with Shane, I think, in the people would call it a folk element that George Stevens has directed in Shane. Because of the use of children, for example, or animals, or just this incidental detail combined with moments of stark kind of emptiness and clear symmetry and texture and things like that. Yeah.
I think I think I didn't say this earlier. Just having talked about minimalism, and you could say in a certain sense, well, there's a sort of, I mean, the music. Okay, it does have sort of dramatic use of orchestra, but at least it has a minimalism in the sense of how much it relies on the 310 Yuma song. Do you think it uses it too much? Because
I think the film is polyphonic, and I think the soundtrack comes
Okay.
through in a number of ways so that it doesn't
Okay.
become tiring, or
Okay.
you don't really. I mean, I was going to ask you actually whether you like the. I really do the acoustic guitar melody version you have in the bar. I think that
Yeah.
works really well.
No, I like that, but I think I do. I think I might disagree with you slightly. But I do
Okay.
kind of feel that by the end of the film, I am kind of like, I do occasionally get bored of not that bloody tune. Once again, it feels to me like perhaps it's over. Yeah, it's sort of tipped its hand just a little too far.
Yeah.
Just because it's so frequently used in so many ways, but.
Okay.
Maybe that's just a matter of,
Well, it's not trying to hide that. It's setting out its stall. It's being very clear about using this soundtrack, isn't it? So I guess I kind of respect that.
Well, we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you, Dominic, for joining me
Thank you, Stephen.
for this discussion
Yes.
of 310 to Yuma.
Um,
And let's do another one soon. Not quite sure what that will be yet.
no,
But
we have yet to decide, but there will be
but another film, I suppose, that's been re-released this month or next.
the film absolutely released or re-released.
People can revisit.
Yeah. So watch this space in maybe a month or so.
Yes, and thank you for listening.
Absolutely.